Yorkists,
Lancastrians,
prisoners,
lend your ears for the King and St. George!
And a huge thank you to all of our Patreons.
Thank you to the Pit Fighters, the First Swords, and all of the Bright Stars, Truth and Courage.
Hello, welcome to the channel. I am Ed, this is my brother Will.
It's true.
We are lovers of fantasy books and historical fiction, and today we're going to be talking about a brand new historical fiction release.
It's very true. We don't often get right on the bandwagon, do we, of historical fiction? Obviously, there's a lot more about the kind of fantasy releases.
Way too many wagons.
But today we're talking about a new release, A Good Deliverance by Toby Clements. It is a new release, as we've said. Before we get into the main brunt, the bread and butter, the meal of this review, we just want to say thank you to Faber and Faber, in particular Tara and Molly, for giving us early access to A Good Deliverance. Of course, in return for an honest review. So today, we will both be talking about our thoughts. So Ed, first you want to tell us the period that we are thrust into with A Good Deliverance, so a bit about the premise.
It is 1468, so it is approaching the golden years. Well, maybe golden years is the wrong term, but
as we look back on it,
the pointy end of the War of the Roses. Wars of the Roses, I should say. And we have the conflict between the Yorkists and the Lancastrians. And we have Warwick here in this book, and we have a lot of key players of the Wars of the Roses, as well as the prehistory, so the history of Henry V, Agincourt, Henry Hotspur, all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So it's a really exciting cast of characters. You get a little bit of the history of England. Anyone who's a medieval enthusiast will definitely take a chunk out of this book. They will absolutely love digging their teeth in.
But not only do you have the kind of, you're intrigued by the historical period, you've also got the central character is Thomas Malory. You may find that name quite familiar. And that is because he is the writer, the founder, the creator of Le Morte d'Arthur, what has become really the bedrock of Arthurian legend. Everything since then kind of links back to Le Morte d'Arthur.
So Will, could you give us kind of a 60-second rundown of how the Arthurian legend and myth changed from the origins to Thomas Malory?
Well, the Arthurian legend, I'm a little bit fuzzier in it now, so I may not get all the details 100% correct, but I will do my best. Arthurian legend, of course, started with a historical setting with Geoffrey of Monmouth and the Welsh monks prior to that, and it was about kind of that British patriotism. And then it spread into kind of mainland Europe, stretching Detroit, adding Lancelot, Camelot, of a lot of the aspects we love, and the fantastical element. And then the legends are still popular, new ones coming along, but they were quite separate and disparate, and they weren't kind of the main popular tale of the British Isles, I believe. And then Thomas Malory wrote Le Morte d'Arthur, brought all of these tales together, cherry-picked his favourites, and made them into a through-line, streamlined story.
It's really
which was full of chivalry, romance, tragedy, heartbreak, the Round Table, of course, and all of the common aspects that we know about the Arthurian legend today.
It's really interesting how he chose his favourite elements of all the different Arthurian myths and legends and histories, possibly. You never know that time period. And he chose it in the time where England were in its own civil war, which was
true.
Really, is that the first English civil war, would you say?
Oh, I'm not really sure, but I would say it's very interesting that often during times of strife and conflict, people harken back to the tales of tragedy and heroism.
Exactly.
But we've talked enough about the premise, we've talked enough about the history of Thomas Malory. What is Toby Clements' take on it? First, I want to say, this is a very unique writing style.
Yes.
It is told in the first person, present tense. It is a chronicler's tale. So we've got the old man, Malory himself, brought back to prison, the exact cell he used to be in for 10 years. He thought he'd escaped. So as he's brought to this cell, not only does he have to come to terms with being in the same place, but he has to come to terms with his memories. Why was he put there originally? And when you're on your own, you've got a lot of time to think about the past. And so it leads to a chronicler's tale where he tells the Chell's son, the person in charge of these prison cells, he tells this boy the story of his life. It is a chronicler's tale, as I said, first person, present tense, but then telling the story about the past. So it took me a little while to get used to the writing style. By a little while, I mean about 20, 30 pages, because it is quite different. And Toby Clements, as I'll let you talk about a bit more, he adopts a very different language.
Yeah, so I've read Toby Clements, his Kingmaker series, which is a fantastic, again, set in the Wars of the Roses historical fiction, where we are following a monk and a nun as they make their way through the Wars of the Roses, joining various sides and ending up in various conflicts. This tale is incredibly different. We have this main character, Thomas Malory, regaling this boy with the stories of his life, and the style of writing is harking very much back to 15th century literature, and it feels very Chaucer, doesn't it? Chaucerian, would we say?
Yeah.
Yes, it does, and it feels like the language, the vocabulary, all the syntax is chosen deliberately. It feels like this is a passion project. It feels incredibly immersive, and I think one thing with historical fiction that I'm always looking for is total immersion. And I think one of the best ways into immersion is knowing the history, is knowing the characters' mindsets, as well as having a style of writing that is unique to that period. And I think Toby Clements does a great job of really throwing us in there. The mindset of these characters is completely different. I'll talk about Thomas Malory and what I thought of him in a minute, and so we both will. But I found the writing style really engaging, really exciting, because it felt something new, something fresh. It didn't feel in any way modern. I don't know if you agree, which I really enjoyed. It felt a little bit like I was reading history and non-fiction at some point.
Yeah, I was going to say 2 words I'd use to describe this are distinct and immersive. Because of that language, this is really an intimate story. It is Malory's own story of his past. We've got the swirling big events of the Wars of the Roses, and also events such as Agincourt going on in the background, and they do occur on the page as well. There's action sequences, although that's not the main focus, because as I said, it's an intimate story. It is Malory's story. It is much about the political intrigues. It's about him being swept above his head with the trials and tribulations of those above him. He's often used as a scapegoat. He proclaims his innocence despite being thrown into prison on numerous occasions. And so we kind of jump between these different timelines, one telling the story of his past, but also the present, as he's not even sure why he's been chucked in prison, and his predicament is becoming clearer and clearer. And we follow a roller coaster of emotions as Malory deals with what he's been chucked into.
What did you think of Thomas Malory as a character from his perspective as well?
I thought it was very interesting following someone who is older, looking back on the past. It's that chronicler's tale, telling the story of the past that we love, don't we? It's a trope, but it's one that it hits home so often.
Yeah.
And
when it's done well. Done well.
And I don't think I've read a book in a medieval setting where it's done before, actually. So that was a first, and I really like that it's from prison as well. That's also a very interesting take, where obviously in prison he's thinking his life could be over at some point soon. I really like that Malory remains as an intimate story. It doesn't become the character with the incredible agency that influences great historical events around him. It maintains that realism in that sense, and that's where it links back to what we said. Immersion. We love immersion. It is so key to our reading experiences, whatever genre it is, and I think especially so with historical fiction. But yeah, I thought Malory was a great central character. He had a lot of drive to him, and he's obviously very complex. It's quite melancholic in tone at times as he's looking on his past, and he's looking at many of the regrets of life. And also, because there is such a link to the Arthurian myths and legends, we see as a child he's brought up on those. And so when he becomes a bit older, is entering more of the army phase, he is disillusioned pretty rapidly. He sees all the knights thinking they're going to be chivalrous and follow the ideals of King Arthur and his round table. But that's pretty quickly stripped away, and I love how that is really dealt.
Agincourt will quickly dispel any of those ideas or sentiments you have about chivalry, won't they?
Yes, they will. And I was going to say, I really like how, even though that's quite typical, especially in books now, disillusionment of warfare, I thought Toby Clements dealt with it in a unique way, and because it's got that Arthurian legend aspect to it, and that's what makes Malory so in love with kind of the histories. I thought that added an extra nuance to the story.
So I was kind of at odds with Malory really through this, because I felt like he was a bit too self-important. I wanted to give him a bit of a shake at times, but I quite enjoy that when you're not 100% sold on the main character, but you're still wrapped up in their journey. You don't have to like every protagonist to get everything out of the story, in my opinion. But he was done well, he was written well, but I feel like Toby Clements wrote him like that on purpose. But yeah, I think this is a book for people who love medieval history, maybe have a passing interest in the Wars of the Roses, or are just fans of some immersive historical fiction. I would say it's quite a slow burner. It's not really the page turner, exciting style of historical fiction, but it's not trying to be that. So it's not like the next Gladiator, really, is it? Where
No.
it's kind of, set piece after set piece after set piece. It's far more, like I said, slow burn, intimate, exploring Malory's character. And this is coming from an author who knows the Wars of the Roses, has written historical fiction in it for quite a few years now, and has clearly done the research. This, like I said earlier, this is a passion project. It feels Toby Clements must have poured a lot of love into this. It's an interesting choice to choose Malory to be the protagonist of your story, rather than choose, especially in the Wars of the Roses, rather than choosing someone who is, involved in all the kind of the political machinations of that time period. So I found it an interesting read. I really enjoyed it for the most part. I think I maybe would have enjoyed it being a little bit, not quite faster paced, but having that aspect of where I just wanted to keep reading, wanted to read more. I think exploring the language was really exciting for me. I really enjoyed the style. But yeah, I feel like I could have set, roughly around the middle.
Yeah, I'd say that this is not a read for someone if they want a really fast-paced read. It's a character study. I think if you're looking for that deeper level engagement, this is the book for you. But also, it does feel... I felt really engaged and hooked because of how different the writing style was.
Yeah.
A lot of people talk nowadays, especially avid readers, that a lot of people just kind of write the same way because it's what sells and it's what's easiest for people to read. This is very different. So if you're looking for something to kind of spice your reading up a bit, I'd definitely look in the direction of A Good Deliverance.
Now, you know a lot more than me about Thomas Malory. So did that make you enjoy it more? Because I'm thinking maybe if I knew a lot more about Thomas Malory's... Because, obviously it's writing from his perspective, so it's him telling his life. I would have maybe found things more interesting had I known, what, his choices, or had I known what was coming. What do you think?
Yeah, I thought... I don't think it really impacted it too much. I knew Malory had been in prison quite a few times, and so I think maybe in the first 20, 30 pages it maybe added a bit more kind of investment from me knowing a bit more about the past. But overall, I don't think you need to at all.
Nice.
Because... in history, and with this, he's taken the idea that Malory was innocent. Was he in history? We don't know, and we never will. And is Malory lying in this?
Exactly.
Is he an unreliable narrator?
Of their own story.
Yeah, is he an unreliable narrator? And so that always, I think, makes it much more of an engaging read when it's from that first-person perspective. So you don't need to know anything about the history to enjoy this. Me knowing more about Malory didn't heighten my enjoyment, but it didn't detract from it either.
Very nice. But all in all, for me, a solid historical fiction. It's a book that I enjoyed reading, and I loved being back in the Middle Ages in the Wars of the Roses. If you like other books set in this time period, then check out Con Igulden's Wars of the Roses series, or Christian Cameron's Chivalry series, which is about the 100 Years' War.
So everyone, that is our conclusion for A Good Deliverance. Please do check this out.
And of course, check out Toby Clements' Kingmaker series, which is, again, a fantastic historical fiction series. It's set in the Wars of the Roses.
You were talking about them a lot last year, weren't you?
I was indeed.
But yeah, that is A Good Deliverance. Thank you again to the publishers for giving us early access. And yeah, this is definitely a thumbs up from me. Nice. You should go and pick this up. Historical fiction lovers, this is for you. Those wanting a fresh read, this is for you.
Truth and Courage from the Brothers Gwyn.
The Brothers Gwyn.